Welcome me in joining Dr. Susan Rice. Thank you.
Good morning. Welcome to this 3-hour workshop, which we're going to spend 45 minutes talking about. If I talk too fast, please stop me because I don't want to talk too fast. I don't do PowerPoint, so what you have are slides that could be PowerPoint. I'm going to ignore some of the ones that you just go through because you're supposed to go through. They're easy to understand. What I'd like you to get out of this presentation is feeling more clear about why you get angry, what happens to you when you get angry, what you need to do with yourself to deal with other people's anger more effectively, and keeping yourself centered in difficult situations. I was very impressed. I sent this to Paul. He must have looked at it very carefully because he said to me, this first chart about the scientific study of conflict behavior, something's wrong with it. It's got the values for the people who have conflict, but it doesn't have anything for the people who don't have conflict. Well, that was supposed to be a joke. 100% of people have conflict, 100% of the time. So if you're working in this field, if you're a human being, if you live, you're going to have conflict in your life. The thing is, there are ways to deal with it more effectively, and there are ways to deal with it less effectively. So I want to start by talking about the difference between being passive and assertive and aggressive. And it's interesting, when you ask people what they are, people who are aggressive will say they're assertive. People who are assertive will say they are passive. Nobody ever wants to say they're aggressive. But the difference, and this is a really valuable difference to understand, is how legitimate are the other person's needs. If you're a passive person, you say to yourself in a conflict interaction, you know what, excuse me, I'm not as important as you, your needs count more than mine. And if you're aggressive, what you say is, I'm more important than you, and my needs count more than yours. And it's only when you're assertive that you say, our needs are both legitimate. And my needs are important, but they're not any more important than yours. And that's really humbling to think about, because if you think of times when you're in a situation, you know you're right, you really want what you want, it's very easy to get yourself into the place where my needs are more important than yours. And what you have to know is that as soon as you let yourself go there, you've crossed the line from being assertive, which we all want to be, we know that's the right thing to be, to being aggressive. And in order to get back to that place of assertion rather than aggression, what you have to do is remind yourself about the legitimacy of the other person's needs. I actually think it's terrific that we have this small representative group that works with batterers, because otherwise it's too easy to say we're the good guys, we work with the victims, and the batterers are the bad guys. As hard as it is to put yourself in that place, you really have to believe that batterers have legitimate needs too, and they're human beings too, and they do what they do in a not very good way to try and get legitimate needs met. And that's where anger comes from, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So when you're trying to think about, in a specific situation, have you crossed the line, you can ask yourself 4 questions, actually 3. One of them is intent. Are you meaning to hurt somebody? Obviously, if your intent is to hurt somebody, then you've crossed the line and you're being aggressive. But the second question is, what about your behavior? If your behavior is hurtful to somebody, then you've crossed the line also, even if you haven't intended to do that. And you know, in a lot of personal situations, you'll say to somebody, especially somebody you love, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, but if you did, you did. And that's the crossing of the line, because when you hurt somebody's feelings, you have subconsciously or consciously said, you know what, my needs count more than your needs. I have a bad temper. I just couldn't help myself. I lost my temper, or I really wanted what I wanted, so I did X, Y, and Z. But as soon as you let yourself go there, and we all do sometimes, you need to know that then you've crossed the line into being aggressive. The third thing, which has to do with your behavior, is the effect on the other person. And that's the bottom line. If I hurt you, it was aggressive behavior. This is obviously a definition that comes from the nonviolent literature, which I really believe in. And I just have to say one thing about violence, because I know that all of you in this room don't think of yourselves as violent people. And you're not, usually. But if you take my definition of violence, and I will own it, it's the Susan Rice definition, violence is anything that hurts anybody in any way at any time. Now, if I ask you how many people in this room are violent, you kind of have to raise your hand, because there is no one, including me, who is never violent. But I think when you become more effective at dealing with anger, your own and other people's, you start moving down a line on a continuum between violence and nonviolence. And what you start to say is that, okay, in this situation, it's not going very well. Is there something I can do to move along that continuum, to do something different, to be someone different that's going to have a different effect on the situation? Does that make sense to people? I apologize for the video. I need a tissue. I have allergies, and my allergy pill hasn't quite kicked in yet. Okay, so thank you. So we're going to talk about anger. And why is it that people get angry? Because when you're dealing with clients, you're obviously dealing with people who are in distraught states. First of all, I want to say that anger is a word we use that's not really the correct word. Underneath anger are a variety of other feelings, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. But using that word anger, which we know is just a catch-hold word, why is it that people get angry? Well, some people say that we all have 5 basic needs in the world. You could argue and say there are 6 or 7, but these are pretty broad categories for belonging, power, freedom, fun, and security. And people get angry when on a big level, those needs aren't being met. It doesn't mean on a little level, because if you look down this list, I'm sure you can find needs on there that you're not getting met right now. And it doesn't mean that you're angry. But what happens to somebody is in their mind, they process experiences. And if the balance tips to, in general, my need for security isn't being met, my need for belonging isn't being met, that's when people get angry. Because underneath that anger is frustration. They want their needs to be met, but they don't know how to do it. I'll give you one example, and I'll sort of do it instead of asking for volunteers for time's sake. All of you can remember a time when you really felt like you belonged, when you were the center of a group, or you're with your brothers and sisters, or you just felt really loved and cared about, and God, I'm part of this group and it's wonderful. And I'm sure you can also remember a time when you really felt left out, like I just don't fit in here, I don't belong anywhere. And what we do subconsciously is we go through life and we kind of rack up those experiences. And if the negative side outweighs the positive side, that's when people get angry, because on a big, deeper meta level, their needs aren't being met. So if you've ever been in a work situation where 3, just because most of you are women, I'll say 3 women go out to lunch, and there's a 4th that you don't invite, and that 4th person gets absolutely furious, it's not because she wasn't invited out to lunch today. It's because on a bigger level, she feels like she doesn't belong. And that really helps you understand why you, in your professional capacity, will often think, boy, that person is overreacting. Why are they making such a big deal out of something little? The reason is, for that person, there's a basic need that's not being met. And when we blow up or overreact or do whatever we do to get attention, it's really a way of saying, help, this need is not being met. And I need it to be met. I need it to be met. There's a guy who writes about nonviolent communication. His name is Marshall Rosenberg. And there's a book based on his writings by Mary McCarthy. It's called Peaceful Meditations. My husband and I have started reading one a day to each other. And they're great. And then we talk about it. The one that I read yesterday has to do with what I just said. And it was called The Please Behind the No. When somebody won't do something you want, when somebody is a pain in the ass, try and think of what they're asking you for and put the word please in. So if I say, no, I won't wash the car, am I really saying, please, I just want some time to be with myself, to read a book, to be me? No matter what somebody says to you, no, I don't want to do this, I won't do this, they're really underneath saying, there's something I want that I'm not getting that's really important to me. And if you can understand that, then you're going to be less likely to react with anger and impatience, but you're going to understand what is it the other person is asking for. And then, of course, it's much easier to get into a discussion of how both people's needs in an interaction can be met. So for me, that was a really helpful thing to think about. So when somebody gets angry, and this can be in your personal life or your professional life, they're trying to get their needs met. I once had a colleague who, I was on a committee meeting with her and things were really going badly, and I actually started to cry. And she looked at me because I felt like I had failed a student of mine. It was a thesis committee meeting. The students here will appreciate that. And she looked at me and she said, you know, we're all just little people doing the best we can. And that's one of my mantras now. When I fail myself, when other people fail me, everybody does the best they can. I never met anyone, including the clients that you work with who are screwing up all over the place. I never met anyone who gets up in the morning and says, I'm going to be the worst person I can be today. I am going to absolutely try and make other people's lives miserable. So when they do, they're not doing a very good job, but they're doing the best job they can in trying to get their needs met. There are some other reasons why people get angry, which are good to know for yourself, but that first one is really what you want to focus on with clients. If you get angry a lot, sometimes anger is a habit, and you can change it. Sometimes anger is a way of staying in control, and then you have to think about being willing to give up control. And sometimes anger is an excuse not to change. If I just get pissed off and walk away, then I don't have to deal with whatever the situation is that's demanding change. But in terms of your being empathic to your clients and understanding their anger, the first reason is the way to go. They're little people, they're doing the best they can, they're trying as hard as they can to get their needs met, and they're choosing a way that's not very effective. So definitely we want to help people do something different, but we can't do that until we understand what's going on behind it. Okay, I'm going to skip the funny questions about what's your anger style, because each one of them, you know what the right answer is. So you can read those for yourself. If your tendency is to choose one of the, quote, wrong answers, then that gives you a piece of insight about yourself as to what you're going to have to work on if you actually want to become more effective in situations where you're angry. There's one piece of research, theoretical literature I would like to throw in here because I think it's really important. Gottman is a marriage counselor, and he says that he can diagnose in an hour interview which marriages are going to succeed and which marriages are going to fail. And when a couple comes to him, he has them come into a room and sit down, and then he says, oh, I forgot something. He didn't. I want you to talk about what brought you in here, and I'll be back in about 10 minutes. Meanwhile, he's videotaping them. And when he comes back in the room, he says, I have to confess, I didn't really forget, and I was videotaping you, and now I want you to watch the videotape. And in that videotape, he measures with the couple these four things, what he calls the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And he counts the number of times criticism happens, the number of times somebody gets defensive, the number of times somebody shows contempt, and the number of times somebody stonewalls the other person. And he teaches them what they are. And he says, if your ratio is 5-to-1, your marriage is going to fail unless you change it. If your ratio is 1-to-5, you have a good chance of keeping it up and making your marriage work. Meaning that in any relationship, if 5-to-1 you say negative things, you do these four things, your relationship's going to fail. If you can change that ratio around, then your relationship is going to succeed. I actually think he's a terrific, he has some terrific ideas. He does a lot of research on his work. It's a little controversial because he doesn't really care about why people do these things to each other or history or background or anything like that. The good thing is this is totally empowering. And you could teach this to your clients, that if you want your relationship to be effective, you've got to change this ratio around. And certainly it makes sense, right? You're going to be more likely to cooperate with somebody who does not do these negative things to you than somebody who does all the time. So when people do these things, we get angry. And now let's talk about how you diffuse anger. There's actually 2 steps I have to tell you about. Number 1 is before you deal with somebody else's anger, which is written in your thing as a diffusing anger model, you have to know what makes you angry so you can calm yourself down. So if I said to you, fill in this sentence, when blank happens, I get angry. 5 volunteers. What would you say? When blank happens, I get angry. Yes. When I'm told I can't do something. When I forget something. When I'm driving and somebody cuts me off, okay? Constant procrastination. One more. When I'm not appreciated. Okay. Everyone in the room has their own triggers. That's what these behaviors are. And you may have heard one of these 5 comments and said, that doesn't make me angry. That's because it's not your personal trigger. But if you know what your personal trigger is, it's clue number 1. And when that behavior happens, you can step back and say, oh, you lied to me. Lying is one of my triggers. I own it. So I have to be careful now because my tendency is going to be to get angry. Okay, that's clue number 1. Clue number 2 is what happens in your body when you get angry. Think of the last time you got angry and what did you feel physically? Again, 4 or 5 reactions. What did you feel? Tense in your stomach. Okay, what else? You get flushed, your face gets red. You get hot, okay. What else? In your throat tightens up. Some people's heartbeat races. Some people's blood pressure goes up. Some people get a knot in their stomach. Some people grit their teeth. Some people clench their fists. Again, it doesn't matter that you know all the triggers. What you need to know is your trigger, because that's clue number 2. So now you told me a lie. That's clue number 1. I happen to be a fist clencher. I've given you a secret of mine. I look down and I see my fists are clenched. That's clue number 2. I need to do something with me to calm myself down. What are some of the things people do to successfully diffuse their own anger? You know how you make yourself calm down. What do some people do? Yes. Breathe deep, okay? Take a time out, okay? What else? Some people vent to a safe person. Some people count to 10. Some people talk to themselves. Doesn't matter what you do. And there's actually a scientific explanation, which I'm going to try and give you, for why this works. In the animal kingdom, when an animal is threatened, a flood of adrenaline goes through their body. And that extra adrenaline is what allows them to do what we know is either fighting or fleeing. If I'm going to win, I'll fight, otherwise I'm going to flee. Well, for us, we don't want to do either of those things. But when you get angry, your bodily sensation is also showing you that there's a flood of adrenaline going through your body. So these self-diffusing techniques allow the adrenaline to go away so that you have a third option besides fighting or fleeing. You could talk to the other person about what's going on. So I've got to do this to myself before I engage with somebody else. Does that make sense to people? It took me maybe 3 minutes to explain. It takes 30 seconds to do. You recognize the behavior that's setting you off. You recognize what's happening in your body. You do something, and then you measure to make sure that you've really calmed yourself down before you engage with the other person. Now, I can try and have a conversation with you and try and help you diffuse your anger. And that's what this diffusing model is about, which I'm going to explain to you. There's a saying from a movie called Dim Sum. This old Chinese woman was giving advice to her daughter-in-law about what makes a successful marriage. And she said, the key to a successful marriage is that only one person is allowed to be crazy at a time. And that's really, really wise. So if you're angry, you're crazy right now. Because the other expression I love is that when anger is high, cognition is low. Would you all agree with that? When anger is high, you're crazy. You're not making sense. You're not rational. So if I see that you're crazy, I can't be crazy too. It doesn't work. It only makes things worse. And some people might say, it's not fair. You know, they're the one that's wrong. Why do I have to be the one that's not crazy? And the answer is because you're more able. Because at that moment, you're the only one left. If the other one is crazy, you're the only one left to not be crazy. So as you can see, I do a lot of talking to myself when I get angry to try and make myself be in a place where I can engage the other person. Because I know that if I don't do those things, the situation's going to get worse and worse. And by the way, I hope that everything I say to you, you feel free to teach your clients. Because I know that even though we're talking about you, most of you don't go to work every day and are angry at your clients, but they're angry. So they need to know these things too in order to be able to more effectively deal with their situations. Sometimes, though, you are dealing with somebody who's extremely angry, and it's hard not to react too. When somebody walks in, I don't know if I'm allowed to use bad language on a video, and says, you blankety blank blank, how could you do this? It's hard not to take it personally. So if one of your triggers is when somebody uses foul language to me, know that, okay, I need to take that 30 seconds to say, this isn't about me. I can take a deep breath. I cannot be angry so that I can more effectively try and diffuse their anger, because I can't have a productive conversation with you until that happens. Diffusing anger, the model, is not conflict resolution. It's creating an environment where conflict resolution can happen, because when somebody's angry, conflict resolution can't happen. Does that make sense to people? Really important to remember. You know how when a kid is having a tantrum, most people know that's not the time to explain to them why things are the way they are? It's not what we call the teachable moment. When the anger is died down, then you can have a conversation. So this model is about how to get somebody from way high up here to way down there. Now, if I can do it without taking a lot of time, is there somebody willing to be angry and do a role play with me from your seat, and I'll try and diffuse the situation? I can't do both parts. That's too hard for me. Anybody want to be angry? No actors or actresses? Thank you. Okay, what would you like to be angry about? Since you volunteered, you can choose. What did I do to you, and who am I? Okay.
Really.
Okay. So for the purposes of the video, I'm going to repeat what you said and then to sort of tell you what your role should be. It's a great example. So they're going for an audition, and they have a time, and they have a busy schedule, and another parent kind of barrels in and goes ahead of them. And when she, as a mom, is legitimately angry and says, why did this happen? It's not right. They say, well, it just happened. Okay? So what I'm going to ask is that I'm going to be the person who made the decision to switch, and you're going to be very angry. I want you to dump on me. But then I'm going to become a really good conflict diffuser. Okay? So that I can demonstrate the steps of the model, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so you need to go off on me, and Paul, you just have to do the best you can to hear her going off on me. Go ahead.
So, Susan, how did this happen?
You've got to be more angry.
I mean, we've been sitting out here for 15 minutes. Trevor's getting more and more anxious. We're waiting. I left dinner at home in the oven, and someone comes out without even asking us and just says, oh, by the way, we switched up the order. Who made that decision? I want to know who's responsible.
Well, first of all, I want to say that I can really see how upset you are.
I'm very upset. We have 2 kids in the program here. We spend $1,600. We're not on scholarship, and somebody just makes a decision without even asking. Usually I'm pretty easygoing. Most of the time it'd be fine. Tonight it wasn't fine. Nobody asked me.
I am so sorry that we screwed up your schedule like that.
Well, I appreciate that, but, I want to know who made the decision. I need to write a letter, and I want to name who decided this.
Okay, and first I want to say one more thing, that if I were you, and I had dinner in the oven, and I was trying to shuttle around 2 kids, I'd be really upset too.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. She was great. And did you notice how the tone of her voice changed from step 1 to step 4? Now, it doesn't take away the fact that if I did screw up, I need to own it, I need to do something about it, I need to finally give her the name. But the reason for going through the steps of the model is that when somebody is angry, and especially when somebody is yelling, they need to be heard. And even I was very conscious because of the mic. Did you notice how I was silent? I didn't jump in when she finished. That's a really crucial step in each step. You listen, period, 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 silence. If I jump in, as soon as she stops talking, the chances are she hasn't finished what she wants to say. And you notice that when I acknowledged her feelings, and I didn't try to apologize right away or offer a solution, she did have more to tell me. And that's important. On one level, when somebody's angry, a lot of times we think, I don't want to know. But on a problem-solving level, you do want to know. You do want to know what the real issues are so that you can genuinely problem-solve what they're about. Because when you start to hear about the dinner in the oven and the running around, you get a much better sense of why she's overreacting to a simple 20-minute schedule change. You start to have a lot more empathy for her position, and that's going to make you much more likely to be responsible and do the right thing. So this is called a developmental model, which people don't like because it means you have to do step 1 before step 2. And in many situations, we want to cut to the chase. Okay, I'm sorry we did it. We can't do anything about it today. What can we do next time? Well, that's just going to make her more angry because she doesn't feel like she's been heard and she doesn't feel like it's been understood. So first I have to really listen, then I have to acknowledge what I see, then I have to apologize for her pain. Now, I'm going to give you an example where I didn't do anything wrong, because a lot of us say, why should I apologize? I didn't do anything wrong. But you're not apologizing for what you did, you're apologizing for the pain that the other person feels. And the example I always give is that when somebody dies and you go to their house and you say, oh, I'm so sorry, you don't think you killed the person, but you're sorry for the pain that's there. That's what this apology is for, that there is genuine pain. And the fourth step is putting yourself in their shoes and agreeing with their truth. Only when that person has heard these 4 steps, then you can invite criticism, which is problem solving. And I'll give you an example. And those of you who are students will appreciate this. When I was a teacher, the worst part of my job was when a student wrote a paper. In my esteemed opinion, it was a really lousy paper. I gave them a grade that I felt they earned, which was not a good grade. And most students were pretty good. You know, what can I do differently? Let's figure it out. I want to get a better grade. Once in a while, I would have a student who would storm into my office, throw the paper at me and say, "How could you do this to me? You did this to me. I didn't deserve it. You're rotten. You're stupid. You're an unfair teacher." All of those kinds of things. The worst thing I could do, which I was often tempted to do, is to stand up and use what little bit of power I had and say, "Don't you dare talk to me like that. You shouldn't talk to me like that." This is where you might get tempted with some of your clients. But that wouldn't do any good. That would just make the other person more angry. So if I can do my thing to myself, okay, you're yelling at me, you're throwing things at me, that makes me angry, my fists are clenched, calm down, take a deep breath, this isn't about you. Now I can say, I can listen. I can just listen and let the student yell at me. They're going to stop because, and that's our fear, that they'll never stop. But they're going to stop because they want to know what my reaction is. And when they stop, if the first thing I say, instead of a retort, is an acknowledgement, I can really see that you're upset. That starts to bring the temperature down in the room. And sometimes, like with you, that acknowledgement will make them want to say more. Okay, yeah, and I really worked hard, and I did this, and I did that, and you're so unfair, da-da-da-da-da. I make sure they're done. I don't interrupt. That's the hard part, is not interrupting. And then I say, "I'm really sorry that this was such a bad experience for you. Am I apologizing for the grade that I gave because I really thought it was the right grade? No. But I can genuinely be sorry that a student, I like students, that a student is in so much pain." Number 4, agreeing with the truth. If I were a student and I had given it my best shot and I got a D on a paper, I'd be really upset too, wouldn't you? I mean, I was a student. It's a horrible experience. Well, by the time you get to that, I can't remember a time when the anger hasn't turned to tears and they're really sad and not angry anymore. And now we can have a discussion. Why was my opinion that this paper was so weak? What could you have done differently? What can you do differently next time around? Because ultimately my goal is for students to succeed. So it's not like I want you to say, "Yeah, this is a D paper and you're a failure." So I couldn't do that when they walked into the room yelling at me. But I can do that after the temperature's gone way down and the person is in a place to be able to hear because their anger is lower, their cognition is higher. Does that make sense to everyone? That's going to be an example that really works with your clients, because often when they get angry at you, clearly it has nothing to do with you. You didn't do anything wrong, but you're the target. So you really have to help them go down by your going through these steps. If this really was a 3-hour workshop, we'd all stop and practice now, but it's not. So you can practice at home. There's another skill that I want you to walk away with, and that's a skill called iMessages. And iMessages are also not the way to resolve conflict. They're a way to create a space for resolving conflict. If I'm upset with you about something, now I have to own my anger. Let's say you're a client and you've been behaving really badly. You show up late, you steal money, you do whatever you do to make me really upset with you. This is a way for me to own what's happening with me and try and engage you in dialogue. So I'll give you just an example. When I come to my office and money's missing from my purse, it really makes me want to distance myself from my clients. It makes me scared that I can't trust people. What I'd really like is to have a relationship with you that if you need money, you'll talk to me about it so we can brainstorm together. What do you think about that? Now, the 6 steps that I went through, it sounds like semantics. When I come back and find money missing, obviously it's you who are here, but the you, if you use the word you put people on the defensive and they can't hear it. When you speak about me, it's my problem. It's not yours. It's my problem that I'm upset about this money missing. And it's my problem that if you're the client in the office, I distance myself from you. So this is why it's my problem. Now, I want to enlist you in helping me solve the problem by telling you step 4 is what I'd like instead. And step 5 is why you would want to change, because people don't like to change that much. So why do you want to do something different? And usually in anybody that you're in relationship with, any kind of relationship, the answer is because we're going to have a better working relationship or a better personal relationship. And number 6, which is the thing that makes it a dialogue instead of a monologue, is, what do you think? So I'm engaging you in a discussion without accusing you, without being angry at you, assuming the best of you. I think the reason that iMessages work so well is that it does assume the best of the other person. What it says on a meta level is that, you know what? I know that if you knew why this was upsetting to me, you wouldn't keep doing it. So I'm going to tell you what I'm upset about, trusting that because we have a relationship, you're going to want to do something to help make it better. And it's a very, very, very powerful tool. And the truth is that now, I've been doing this for 20 years, when I'm going to have a difficult conversation with somebody, personally or professionally, I often write it down, not to say, excuse me, I want to give you an iMessage and read to them, but because it helps me clarify what is it I really feel, what really are the effects, why is this bothering me, and what really do I want from you. And when I write it down by myself and I think about it, then when I go in to have this difficult conversation, it's much more hearable because I figured out what's really going on in my head. The thing about both the diffusing anger model and this is that it has to be authentic. And I have to say that twice. It has to be authentic. There's nothing worse. It enrages people when you go in and you're phony. Whether it's apologizing or I really want this or whatever it is, if it's not genuine, people know, and then they get even more angry because they feel like they're being manipulated in a bad way. The truth is we all manipulate each other. The definition of manipulation is trying to move things around. And definitely, if I'm giving you an iMessage and trying to help you diffuse your anger, I'm trying to move you around to a place where we can problem solve. But I'm not doing it in a way that is phony or trying to just get my needs met. I'm doing it in a way that's saying both of our needs are legitimate, and my needs are legitimate, your needs are legitimate, and these are ways to get us to a place where we can have a conversation about what's legitimate. So the last thing on this sheet is about principled negotiation, and I won't go over the whole thing. What I'll just say is that the first one is really the essence. When you separate the person from the problem, you have a much better chance of solving the problem. So if the problem is, my husband doesn't take out the garbage, my husband isn't the problem, the garbage is the problem. And once we look at that out there as the problem, then we can become allies in solving it. But as soon as the person becomes the problem, they become your enemy, and then you're tempted to go into those old bad habits of saying, I'm right, you're wrong, my needs are more legitimate than yours, and then you cross the line to being aggressive rather than assertive. So this is the quickest 3-hour workshop I've ever given on anger. I hope it's been useful. I'm happy to answer questions and wish you peace in your relationships.
Yes.
I don't know if you can answer this question. When somebody makes you angry, and in particular when you're in a situation where you're confronted by situations that cause you to have that anger response, and you know that the physiological thing that happens is your body is flooded with adrenaline. When you take over mentally and go through these steps, and you let your brain take over rather than letting your body take over, what happens to that adrenaline? Because you're not going into the fight or flight. Your brain's taking over. What happens to that all that adrenaline that gets in your body? Do you know?
The question is, what happens to the adrenaline when your brain takes over? Where does it go? I don't know the scientific answer to that. I know that we have adrenaline in us, and when you're threatened, an extra dose comes out. So my guess is when you calm yourself down and the threat goes away, that extra adrenaline just goes back in at the same levels that it was before. But I'm not a scientist, so I don't know the scientific explanation. Yes?
Any suggestions for, I'm a timeout person. I need a minute, if I'm confronted, and I actually have had situations where I said to the person, I need a minute, and they kept in my face, and then I reacted. So, do you have any tips for?
The question is, if you're a timeout person and you say to somebody, I need a minute, what happens when they ignore you? Wait, then I would interrupt. You're not hearing me. I really want us to work this out, but right now I can't. So let's come back together in 15 minutes. That's when you have to be really assertive about what you need while not negating what they need. So if somebody's like desperate and you say to them, I can see that what you really need is to talk about this now. And what I really need is to take 5 minutes. And I'm really hoping that you'll be able to hold on so that when I take what I need to do this well with you, you're still going to be able to talk to me. So even though I am absolutely saying no to you, I'm trying to do it in as kind and compassionate a way as I can so that you know I believe that your needs are legitimate as well. Other questions?
What if the level is really high in terms of like my daughter? So like she's screaming, and my tendency is to do what Wendy said, to say, I'm not going to talk to you when you're like this. But that makes her more furious.
Yeah, well the question is when the level is really high, your tendency is to say, I'm not going to talk to you, then it gets worse. I think if you can do something cognitive by yourself before it happens, to remind yourself that when she gets crazy, it's not about you. It may seem to be about you, but it's really not. You can tolerate listening more. I used to use examples about kids screaming at social workers, and if it's your client, somehow you can take more abuse than when it's with your child. But I was once teaching in South Africa, and this woman, very proper British woman, said, I would never tolerate a client speaking to me like that. And I said, well, then you probably won't be effective with angry clients because you know what happens when you say, I won't tolerate it. They just get more angry. So is there a way, because you want to be an effective social worker, that you can turn that around so it doesn't become, this is behavior I won't tolerate, but instead it becomes, this is a desperate, desperate plea to be heard. And it worked for her because it was a client. It's much harder to do with your daughter, and I know that, but it's the same skill. It's learning that the worse the behavior, the more of a desperate cry for help. And it's not that you tolerate the behavior. When the anger is over and you have the teachable moment, there is a place to say, that was really hurtful to me. But I wouldn't say it was unacceptable because I'm the mother and I'm in charge. I would go with an I message. That really hurt me, and it made me doubt that you love me, and it makes me want to withdraw from you, and I really want... See, you have the power to say the good stuff that you know she feels underneath as well. And you have to be a model because you're more able, because she's the crazy one. Yes?
Yeah, I think that the desperate part, like for her daughter and a lot of people, is that they don't trust that they're ever going to be heard.
Right.
So if you just keep coming back to, I will talk to you in 5 minutes, and keep focusing on, in 5 minutes I'm going to talk to you, I will talk to you in 5 minutes, here's an alarm clock, when it goes off in 5, repeating that, and then I will talk to you, and then really keep your word, then the next time she's going to know you mean business, and that she will trust that you will come back. But I think a lot of people it's got to be now, because they've never had, not your daughter, but other people that we deal with have never had a person who will actually set an appointment and keep it to come back and deal with an issue.
That's a good point. The point was that a lot of people don't trust that they'll ever get heard, so that's why the now is so important. So if you need a timeout, if you say, I'll come back, and then you do it, and you're true to your word, then they'll start to trust you. So there are two ways to do it. If you really can't take it, you need to take the time out, you do it compassionately. The other way is to really help yourself in advance know this isn't directed at you, so maybe you can tolerate some behavior as long as it's verbal that you didn't think you should tolerate, that you don't deserve, but you do it in the name of understanding this is desperation on somebody else's part. Because I've told my teacher story to other teachers, and they say, I would never let a student talk to me like that. And maybe they wouldn't, but I don't think they have as helpful resolutions if they insist on being the more powerful person. A whole nother topic for a workshop is when you have power, what you do as a mom and you do as a worker is giving some of it away to the person who feels even more powerless. There's another hand up over there.
Could you say a little bit about the relationship between anger and depression?
They say, the research says that anger is depression turned outwards or depression is anger turned inwards. And I think that there is a lot of truth to that. When somebody is angry, they're putting it out there because it's too painful to feel what's inside. When you look at the feelings that are underneath anger, they're usually things like sadness, anxiety, shame, humiliation, rejection, disrespected. Those things are very painful to the person. And those things would be more likely to make somebody depressed. So if I'm angry or showing anger, it's because those other underneath feelings are too painful for me to deal with. The person who's depressed has said, I can't let any of it out. It all comes turned inward, and that makes them overwhelmed by the negative feelings. So the balance is being able to help people find a healthy way to express the things that really bother them so they don't need to either lash out violently or turn it inwards to themselves. Anybody else?
I have a question. When a person's obviously very angry and they sort of go through their event and then they're done, how important is it to acknowledge what's occurred? Because sometimes they just do that and then they go on in a more way.
The question is when somebody's really angry, they vent, they dump, and they're done. How important is it to acknowledge it? I think if you don't want it to happen over and over again, it's very important. Because then when they're done, that's when their cognition comes back and they're able to process some of what happened, and could there be a better way to do it next time? So in the long run, especially if you have an ongoing relationship, it would be important. If it's a stranger on the street, you can walk away and say, good, they're done.
So it becomes a habit.
Right, it can become a habit. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Don't you want to package her up? Don't you want to package her up and take her with you every time you have a conflict? Susan, thank you.